They always say you can tell what kind of town you're in by how the courthouse feels, and the one in Brierwood felt cold long before you ever stepped inside. Not temperature cold, more like the kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you realize nobody here is rooting for you. The first thing I noticed wasn't the flag or the seal on the wall. It was the way people avoided eye contact like they already knew how this story usually ended. And yeah, I knew it too. I just didn't know yet that this time it was going to end very differently. I walked in wearing a faded gray jacket, nothing fancy, just something warm enough to get through the morning. My hair was pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry worth mentioning. To anyone watching, I looked like another tired woman with another small problem the system would chew up and spit out before lunch. That was the point. I'd learned a long time ago that people show you exactly who they are when they think you don't matter. The judge that morning was Marcus Harlan, a name everyone in Brierwood recognized. He liked to call himself old school, which usually meant loud, impatient, and allergic to being questioned. He sat high on that bench like it was a throne, leaning back smirking, tapping his pen as if every person in front of him was interrupting something more important. When defendants spoke, he barely listened. When lawyers spoke, he tolerated them if they flattered him first. I wasn't there on some grand mission, at least, that's what I told myself. I was there because my younger cousin had been fined into the ground over a minor property issue and because I'd heard too many stories from this town that sounded exactly the same. People being laughed at, cut off, punished not for what they did but for who they were and how they looked. You know what I mean? As I sat waiting for my case to be called, I watched him work. A single mom tried to explain why she missed a deadline. He rolled his eyes and doubled her fine. An older man asked a question about payment options. The judge told him maybe jail would teach him responsibility. People laughed, nervous laughs, the kind you give when you're scared to be next. Each time the gavel hit the desk, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that says, "Here we go again." When my name was called, I stood up slowly and walked to the front. My knees cracked a little. Age does that to you, and I could feel his eyes on me for the first time, scanning, judging, already bored. He didn't even look up when he asked me to state my name. When I did, he finally raised his head and his mouth curled into that look, the one I'd seen on men like him my whole life. He glanced at my clothes and said, "You know, this is a court, not a bus station, right?" A few people chuckled. Not because it was funny, but because laughing felt safer than silence. I smiled politely and said I understood that I was here to address a citation related to a structure on my late mother's property. He sighed like I'd asked him to solve a math problem. He told me I'd ignored notices. I explained calmly that the notices had been sent to the property address, not my residence, and that proper procedure required otherwise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just stated a fact. That's when his posture changed. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing like I'd just crossed an invisible line. "Don't lecture me on procedure," he said. "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive." There it was. The assumption, the dismissal. I felt that old anger rise, but I kept my tone steady and said I was only asking for the same due process afforded to everyone else. The room went quiet. He stared at me for a second, then laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, loud and sharp. He said I'd been watching too much television, that this wasn't one of those legal dramas where everyone gets a speech. Then he fined me on the spot, added another penalty for wasting the court's time, and warned me not to push my luck. I felt something shift inside me then, not fear, not exactly, more like clarity. I told him respectfully that imposing punitive fines without a hearing violated basic constitutional protections. I could see the words land not as information, but as an insult. His face flushed. He slammed the gavel and told the bailiff to remove me. Said I was in contempt. As they led me away, I didn't fight it. I didn't protest. I let the metal door close behind me and sat down on a hard bench in a holding room that smelled like bleach and old regret. 2 women were already there. One was barely out of her teens' eyes, red from crying. The other looked like life had taught her not to expect much. They asked what I was in for. I said, contempt of court. The older woman shook her head and said the judge ruined lives for sport. I told them quietly that bullies always believe they're untouchable until the day they aren't. The younger one asked if I was scared. I told her no, not anymore. I'd been underestimated my whole life. I knew how this part went. Upstairs, Judge Harlan was probably already telling someone how he'd put another troublemaker in her place. What he didn't know was that I'd been recording everything since I walked through the door, and that the small case I'd filed was never about a building. It was about a pattern, about power, about catching someone in the act when they thought the audience didn't matter. When they finally came to get me, the bailiff wouldn't meet my eyes. He said the judge wanted to see me in his chambers. His voice shook a little. That's when I knew the story had turned. When I walked in, Judge Harlan wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing, tie-loosened hands, fidgeting with a glass of water like it might save him. He started apologizing before I even spoke. Said there'd been a misunderstanding. Said if he'd known who I was, things would have gone differently. I let him talk himself into a corner, then asked him one simple question. Why should respect depend on who you think someone is? He didn't have an answer. I told him my name, my actual name, and watched recognition dawn like a slow-motion crash. I told him about the complaints, the recordings, the investigators already on their way. I told him this wasn't personal, even though it felt like it. This was accountability. When the agents arrived, he didn't protest. He just looked small. As they let him out through the same hallway, he'd ruled like a king. People stared. Some whispered. Some filmed. I walked out behind him, still in my faded jacket, and for the first time, nobody laughed. Outside, the air felt lighter. The young woman from the holding room was released. So was the other. Paperwork shredded. Fines erased. They hugged me like they couldn't quite believe it. I told them to go home to breathe, to remember this feeling. Weeks later, the town was still buzzing. Investigations spread. Deals unraveled. People who'd stayed silent suddenly found their voices. I didn't stick around for the celebration. I never do. Justice isn't about applause. It's about balance. So here's what I want to know from you. Was I right to wait to let him show his true self before